red meat is a health food. I know that you would agree with that.
Say that again.
Yeah, I think that red meat is a health food.
Red meat is definitely the target of propagandists continually. But now the climate people have got a hold of it as well.
Yeah.
Well, plants don't like being eaten by bugs, and most of them aren't that happy about being eaten by us either. And so they have got very potent chemical defenses. So if it has an ad on TV, avoid it.
Yeah. To the best of your ability.
Obviously, at some point, we're going to get into the issue of the carnivore diet.
Yeah.
And so
yeah.
I've never recovered from finding out that the food pyramid was a scam.
Yeah.
Is there a worse medical crime in history than that?
No, I mean...
No.
It's about as bad as it gets, and we have people like Ansel Keys to thank for it. As historian John M. Barry once said, when you mix politics with science, you get politics.
Telling Americans to load up on 7 to 11 servings of grains every single day?
Yeah. And to find out that that was a marketing ploy by the Department of Agriculture and that they went against the advice even of their own consultants who warned them that they would produce an epidemic of obesity and diabetes, which is exactly what we have now.
Exactly.
It's like, I don't know what you even do when you find out that that's true.
Well, you adopt a pure carnivore diet and quit entertaining the sugar and pharmaceutical companies.
Yeah, and the unwarranted demonization of natural fat-containing foods, nutrient-dense foods like animal-source foods, which continue to be demonized.
Even by the American Diabetic Association Society, I don't remember which one is still pushing the notion that diabetics can eat carbohydrates. Like, actually, I don't think so. I don't think that's a very good idea, since they're converted to sugar.
Exactly. All carbohydrates are, in fact, metabolized as sugar.
And, you know, with that demonization of these like natural whole foods, I mean, we live in a time where 60% of the calories that your average American consumes comes from what are called ultra-processed foods.
Right.
So the
center of the supermarket.
Exactly. The antithesis to whole foods, right?
Yeah.
So the idea that we're still demonizing whole foods, to me, is insane.
Yeah. What's the percentage of Americans now who are obese?
By 2030, 1 in 2. This is like frank obesity.
Right. And so the morbidly obese will be 1 in 5?
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
And obesity is a risk factor for
everything.
Pretty much everything. Yeah. Yeah.
And the cure isn't fat positivity. No, definitely not.
Right. It's absurd that some people are actually celebrating metabolic dysfunction.
Our initial agricultural ancestors, especially in colder climates, it's like maybe you wanted to pack on an extra 20 pounds before winter hit, you know, and so maybe that's an evolutionary adaptation that you took full advantage of the harvest.
It's an adaptive survival mechanism. Those of us who are the most adept at putting on and storing fat would make it through the famine of winter.
Yeah, the winter. And you can see why that wouldn't happen in the case of animal products, because your cows, your lambs, your goats, etc., they can survive the winter no problem. You don't have a storage problem there.
Yeah.
And so, and you don't have a seasonality problem, so there's no reason to pig out, so to speak. Right.
There you go. Animal products are the only thing that's available all year round in terms of food. Plants come and go with the seasons.
I lost a lot of weight because of the diet that I'm on, and I kept it off. And that's quite the bloody miracle, that's for sure. Like, I weigh what I weighed when I was in my 20s. You know, that's really something when you're 62. And I have about the same bodily composition that I did when I was in my 20s. Some of that's obviously from not eating carbohydrates, but there are other improvements that I've experienced that have made me wonder things that we think are edible would rather not be eaten. People are worried about the pesticides that are on plants, and fair enough, but they're not nearly as worried about the pesticides that are in plants. And there are plenty of them because, well, plants don't like being eaten by bugs, and most of them aren't that happy about being eaten by us either. And so they have got very potent chemical defenses, and they're not trivial.
Plants can't run or hide, so they fight to defend themselves via chemical warfare.
Like, I had psoriasis. It's gone. Some of the psoriasis patches had lasted, well, literally decades, and they're gone. And I think, oh, well, I was obviously eating something that was causing that.
And this is where the debate about the carnivore diet and all that becomes really interesting. You know, a robust organism such as yourself should be able to consume some of these plant, quote unquote, defense compounds and garner a degree of, you know, additional strength in so doing, right?
You say should, but he can't. So he shouldn't, right? He's only robust now because he's taken all of the plants and their derivatives out of his diet, all those toxic metabolites. And so now he's thriving. Now his biome is robust.
There's this notion of hormesis, where low doses of a certain stressor or toxicant, if you will, might actually cause a response in the system that actually leads to an up-leveling of robustness, of vigor, of strength.
A pharmacon means something like a little bit of the poison that kills you cures you.
Yeah. And so that's where I think if you have a robust, for example, gut microbiome, I think that most people should be able to derive value from these kinds of compounds.
That's the theory.
Exactly. That's the theory, but it doesn't play out that way for a huge percentage of us.
I mean, when you look at the average health state of the typical person, it makes you wonder, right? And I've wondered how far down the rabbit hole you have to go to get to the bottom, given how obese people are and, well, what I've seen as the consequences of a relatively radical dietary shift. Well, that's obviously one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you today. Let's turn then. Tell people what a whole food is, just so they know.
Yeah, so whole foods don't have extensive ingredients lists. They are the ingredients. So these are the foods that you tend to find around the perimeter of the supermarket. As you alluded to, it's the aisles of the supermarket.
Stay away from the aisles in the supermarket.
Yeah, generally you want to focus your shopping around the perimeter of the supermarket. And so I'm a huge advocate of the consumption of whole animal source foods and whole plants, which is a very controversial statement to say today. I don't know why.
It's not controversial. It's just anti-propagandistic.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
With the advertisements being a form of propaganda.
Yes.
Although they're the capitalist version of propaganda.
Yeah. I mean, 73% of the items in your average supermarket are ultra-processed. Yeah.
So those are manufactured foods.
Correct.
So if it's made by a giant corporation and it's in a box.
If it has an ad on TV, if it likely.
If it has an ad on TV. Oh, that's an interesting marker.
Yeah.
Right.
It's a good heuristic, right?
I can get on board with that. I mean, every advert I can recall seeing has just been pushing toxic degeneracy. So
yeah, sure.
Yeah.
So if it has an ad on TV, avoid it.
Yeah. To the best of your ability. I think like a little bit here and there, I like to be a pragmatist.
Do you actually think it's possible to just eat a little bit of ultra-processed foods? My experience with that has been that it's easy to eat none rather than some. Because the problem with some is that, well, how about some more?
Yeah. This is where I think the education around this topic is crucially important, because people are usually not armed with the knowledge that these foods have a profound impact on your behavior.
So why advocate for a little bit here and there then? Surely no cyanide is better than a little bit of cyanide here and there.
Because we're told that all foods fit.
All calories are equivalent.
Yeah. And so people think that it's a moral failure when they go to the freezer, they take out the pint of ice cream, intending only on having a spoonful. And before they know it, they're looking at the bottom of the pint.
Yeah.
That's what you're programmed to do. And in fact, that's what food scientists are paid lots and lots of money.
To make sure you do.
To make sure that you do. Yeah.
So not really good advice then.
And also your body gets used to what it is that you feed it regularly, and it starts to crave the things that you feed it regularly.
You can see that with foods like olives and coffee. No child likes their first olive. You have to cultivate the taste. And
children haven't been brainwashed and indoctrinated yet. And so when they are fed Brussels sprouts and olives and things like this, they spit it out because it's bitter. And that bitter taste is an indication of how toxic that substrate is.
The taste and reward systems are quite interesting in their relationship, because the satiety system and the reward system are separate from the taste systems, which you can tell because you can eat something to satiety and it still tastes the same, but you don't want it anymore.
So he's just describing our natural human satiety signals kicking in and saying, well, put your foot down, you've had enough. Now, that only happens when we're talking about real food. You can't overeat steak. You can't eat steak until you feel sick, not really. But you can with sugar, because your satiety signals work very differently. And in nature, it would be advantageous to just keep going on those berries while they're available for maybe just 3 weeks of the year. That way, it's advantageous for you to put on some weight and survive the winter.
Now, you could imagine a system where the more ice cream you eat, the less you can taste it until you can't taste it at all, so you quit. But that's not how it's set up. And the satiety and reward systems are somewhat separate for each taste category. So when people say, well, I still have room for dessert, what they mean is, well, I've satiated the umami system for protein, but not the system for carbohydrates or sugar.
That's basically what I was just talking about. We're always geared up to crave sugar. There's always room for dessert kind of thing. And that is for our own survival. When we would stumble across some honey, we would take advantage of that. That could help us to survive. But when winter never comes and we've got honey available every day all year round, fruit juices available every day all year round, that's not natural, that's not normal. And so we have higher levels of Randall cycle activation, and it's just never quitting. And so it's doing a lot of damage to our bodies and our cells and tissues.
We don't like bitter things, but once you learn to like them, you really like them. And so that shows you that that's a testament to that modifiability of the taste and the satiety system by experience.
Somebody who has a higher degree of openness, can embrace these more complex flavors.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think cultivating a broader palate, I think, is incredibly important.
Embrace more complex flavors. I mean, it's a bit of a pretentious statement, in my opinion. Like, why would we need to cultivate a broader palate? Jordan Peterson used to have a broader palate. So did his wife Tammy. So did his daughter Michaela. I used to have a broader palate. Didn't work.
So for somebody who's chronically eating, a high carbohydrate diet, their bodies get better at burning, glucose, for example.
Nobody gets better at metabolizing glucose. You're putting excess sugar in the blood, which means you have to secrete insulin just to take the sugar out of the blood, just to keep you alive. And, you've got things like glycation. You're damaging your cells. There's nothing, you don't get more robust, you deteriorate.
Somebody who's on a, highly fat-adapted ketogenic diet, for example, they become better at burning fat.
Nobody's burning anything, right? Technically, we are designed to oxidize fatty acids to derive ketone bodies for fuel.
What's the FDA recommended daily allowance, RDA, for carbohydrates? There's no RDA for carbohydrates.
Yeah, there's no such thing as an essential carbohydrate.
Right. That's something to be said repeatedly.
Yeah.
Because that's really kind of shocking.
It is. We have, a daily requirement for certain essential fats, certain, fatty acids like omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids.
Yep. Proteins.
Protein is massively important.
Yep.
There's no such thing as an essential carbohydrate, which isn't to say that you shouldn't eat them.
Right. But it's very strange that's not essential.
What I actually find strangest about this whole thing is, yes, there are no essential carbohydrates. They don't exist. But the fact that the majority of human beings on planet Earth base their diets around them. So that's the strangest thing to me. This is typical with your doctor. And the same goes for fiber. He'll tell you to eat more whole grains, eat more fiber and all this stuff for health, when carbohydrates and fiber are non-essential.
The public has an idea that there's not a lot of distinction between a physician and a scientist, or they believe that physicians are scientists, and most physicians believe that. But they're not.
Correct.
And most physicians aren't trained to read research or assess it critically, and certainly not to participate in its generation.
Most physicians are, in fact, technicians. And many, but not all, physicians have become paper pushers for the pharmaceutical.
Unfortunately, they might be the nicest people on the planet, but they are legal drug dealers. That is what they have been programmed to be.
And this is, I guess, somewhat more controversial, but I think red meat is a health food. I know that you would agree with that.
Say that again.
Yeah, I think that red meat is a health food. And I'm not and this is an opinion that I've established based on data. But I think it is an incredibly nutrient-dense food.
It's the most nutrient-dense food.
And
cows go to a lot of work to make it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I mean, all those stomachs, right?
Right.
That they have.
Right, absolutely. So that's the right kind of ultra-processing.
Spot on. That is very, very well put.
There you go. Right? It's like nature's form of ultra processing. And so I think that's an incredibly important food, but
right, so it's remarkable that that's been demonized. And the thing is, the demonization doesn't quit, because for a long time it was driven by idiot quasi-scientists and people who are maneuvering in the same domain as the food pyramid liars. But now the climate people have got a hold of it as well.
Yeah.
Good old Bill Gates wants to eradicate the evil cows and the evil sun.
But for whatever reason, animal-related food, while there's also the ethical issue, which isn't trivial, I would say, that's not something that can be easily ignored or should be. But red meat, it's the target of propagandists continually. And that's really not good if it turns out that it's actually useful, like seriously useful for us.
We can't live sustainably absent ruminants.
Beef consumption in the United States has declined over the past few decades. And yet we continue to blow up. We get sicker, we get more obese, and it's a whole food at the very least. It's a pristine source of dietary protein, comes concurrent with, all kinds of nutrients that we know play a role in good health. I mean,
try every essential nutrient, in fact.
It's actually, it is a source of phytonutrients. Most people don't realize this, but, the phytonutrients that a cow ingests makes its way into the tissue of that animal, just as it does us. Creatine, taurine, carnitine, carnosine. These are all, I think,
not found in plants.
Really important nutrients, and it continues to be demonized. I think the demonization of red meat is a real shame, and it's a big problem. And the evidence that's used to demonize it is incredibly weak.
Right. As is most nutritional science. Stunningly weak. Yeah. Correlational studies in the field of nutrition are not helpful. Too many variables.
Those are the kinds of studies that make up our dietary guidelines. Those are the kinds of studies that again and again, implore us to consume grains at every meal. The illustrated USDA food pyramid, it was like pasta. It was like loaves of bread.
Yeah.
Like, you're telling me that that's essential for good health, that I need to be eating 7 to 11 servings of this
at least
on a daily basis. And so if you actually look at what a grain is, most grains today actually in the supermarket are fortified because they're so nutrient impoverished that they have to have added nutrients to them to make
even
them
in their basic form,
serve any sort of dietary value at all.
You know, I'm willing to give the Department of Agriculture, let's say, its credit for ensuring that calories per se are in plentiful supply, which is the case. But man, we're paying a vicious price for it on the other side of it.
Every 30 seconds, a human being on planet Earth loses a limb thanks to diabetes.
Grains, I don't believe, are, particularly when you have all these other options in the supermarket, like grass-fed, grass-finished beef, wild fatty fish, salmon, for example. Eggs, you know, eggs are one of nature's cognitive multivitamins. A study was just published that found that all it takes is 1 to 2 eggs a week in this one study, and there was close to a 50% risk reduction for the development of Alzheimer's disease.
Wow.
We know that choline is one of the most important nutrients. In fact, about 40% of the effect that they saw in this observational trial, they thought was attributed to the fact that egg yolks are the top source of choline in the standard American diet.
Once again, choline does not exist in any plant foods.
And yet 90% of adults today don't consume the adequate intake for choline on a daily basis. And choline
Right,
is
so that's the consequence of demonizing eggs.
There you go. You demonize eggs.
Great.
It forms the skeleton molecule of our neuronal membranes, which are crucially important for our brain cell communication, our ability to perceive the world.
Just one of the many reasons why vegans seem to suffer with TikTok brain.
An egg is literally a cognitive multivitamin. I mean, it contains a little bit of everything required to grow a brain, right? So it's...
Obviously, at some point, we're going to get into the issue of the carnivore diet.
Yeah.
And so what are your thoughts about the carnivore diet?
I mean, I think it's potentially a great therapeutic diet for people that have a predisposition to autoimmunity.
Yeah, okay.
And it's not something that I would ever behold anybody. For people that have seen a reprieve of symptoms from some of these awful conditions that people suffer from, like, keep doing it.
I knew that fasting was a reliable treatment for arthritis, and that's well documented in literature. Virtually everyone who's arthritic, if they fast, they go into remission. But then when they start eating, the symptoms come back. And maybe that's not true if all they start eating again is red meat. You know, and we've talked to hundreds or maybe thousands of people now who've tried variants of the carnivore diet and had radical transformations. Like they're shell-shocked because they've lost like 150 pounds in 18 months. They're not even the same people physically. Well, they're happy about it, obviously, but also completely shocked by the fact that that worked. And I know people say, well, anecdotes aren't data. It's like, no, but they're hypotheses.
Yeah.
And many of the same anecdotes start to look a lot like data. So anyways, we've talked to many people who've reported remission of their diabetic or arthritic symptoms within 2 weeks of an only beef diet. You can live on just beef. So like, what the hell? If you're half dead and radically overweight.
Beef it's an incredibly nutrient-dense food. It's highly satiating.
Yes.
It's loaded with protein, obviously. You're restricting the consumption of large swaths of the most problematic foods accessible to a modern human today. And so it doesn't surprise me that at least in the short term, you're going to see an improvement.
Yeah.
Well, Jordan's seen vast improvements and even complete resolution with many of his chronic conditions. And he's been doing it now for nearly 6 years.
I think people should be able to tolerate, and not just tolerate, but to derive a health benefit from, you know, many of these so-called plant defense compounds.
A benefit from plant toxins.
Even cruciferous vegetables, which have become demonized in certain carnivore circles, you know.
Cruciferous vegetables are man-made. They all derive from a wild mustard plant that you wouldn't eat. You wouldn't recognize it. Go check it out, seriously. You
know, carotenoids like lutein and zeaxanthin, which we know are very beneficial to brain health. You know, you're not going to find a better source of them in the supermarket than kale.
Humans have absolutely no business in consuming plant leaves. We're just not geared up and designed to metabolize that stuff like, for example, other primates. People often conflate humans with primates and what we're supposed to eat. It's nonsense, right? Unless you enjoy flatulence and kidney stones, I would stay well away from those.
We've lost resilience in the gut, I think, and that's why so many of us do seem to do better, seemingly, on these elimination diets, right?
Well, I've really enjoyed listening to Jordan Peterson's take on things. I do really appreciate his intuition and his line of thinking. I think he's on the right track with a lot of stuff. He is passionate when he talks, and I do love that anger behind some of the things that he inserts. And I'm the same, you know, because we've been lied to, quite frankly, about too many things for too long and at the expense of innocent people's health. And that's not cool. In terms of Max Lugavere, he seems like a real smart human being, seems like a real nice guy. Unfortunately, I'm just disappointed in some of his advice and the fact that he advocates for so many whole plant foods and things like this. You know, carbohydrates are all metabolized as glucose, fibers, non-essential. Plants do contain toxins and, you know, oxalate, lectins. They're pretty ubiquitous and they do a lot of damage to human health. So anyway, let me know what you guys think in the comments and I will see you in the next one. Cheers.